Hello and welcome to Reading the Gospels Together for Friday, August 14th. And today, one of the big turning points in the history of Christianity, an action-packed chapter which features the conversion from Saul the persecutor to Paul the preacher. Now, we were introduced to Paul back in chapter 7 at the tragic stoning of Stephen. Those carrying out the killing, we're told, laid their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul. Messy business, stoning somebody to death. We're also told that Saul was there giving approval to Stephen's death. Now, chapter 8 details the rupture between the church and the temple, telling us that on that day, a great persecution broke out against the church at Jerusalem. Saul began to destroy the church, we read. Going from house to house, he dragged off men and women and put them in prison. Remember, in the book of Acts, when we hear about the church, we're not talking about a building or a congregation. We're talking about all the believers. And that brings us to chapter 9. Having chased most of the Jerusalem Christians either out of town or underground, again, Luke gives no clue as to the amount of time this takes, Saul now sets his sights further afield. There was a large community of Jews in Damascus, a center of trade and commerce, about 135 miles from Jerusalem, the same Damascus we hear about in Syria today. Now, many Christians had either fled there or had come to the faith under the ministry of Jesus in Galilee and in the Decapolis, much closer to Damascus than Jerusalem. Throughout the Gospels, we hear of people coming from Syria to see and hear Jesus. So we read in chapter 9, meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. A couple of things to notice. One of the titles of those who followed Jesus, the term Christian hadn't yet been coined, was the way, perhaps referring to the title of Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. Another thing to notice is that Saul is searching for disciples in the synagogues. The separation of Judaism and Christianity, well underway in Jerusalem, has not yet made its way further afield. In any case, God has different plans than Saul. Listen to what happens. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. Talking about Saul. Saul fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus whom you're persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city and you'll be told what you must do." We read the men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. Now that is the famous Damascus Road experience, so famous that the phrase has become a synonym for conversion to a radically different point of view or lifestyle, even in non-Christian circles. When someone is said to have a Damascus Road experience, it means they completely changed their mind or their way of life. And this Damascus Road experience of Saul is so important that it's repeated in the book of Acts in chapter 22 and chapter 26, as Saul himself tells the story. I keep calling him Saul because Luke hasn't changed to calling him Paul yet and won't for a few chapters. Now, blinded by the light, Saul is staying at a home in Damascus when a man named Ananias is sent to find him. He's led there by God in a vision. And Ananias, who isn't keen on the prospect, is told to lay hands on Saul and pray for him. Filled with the Holy Spirit, Saul's sight is regained and he's baptized into the way. Now, Saul, throughout his letters, refers to having a thorn in the flesh, a physical malady, and he's attended by a physician, Luke, for the greater part of his life as well. Many think that perhaps, even though Saul regained his sight, it remained a problem for the rest of his life. Others suggest different ailments for thorn in the flesh. For me, who suffers regularly from kidney stones, I share the opinion of Martin Luther from 500 years ago, also a kidney stone sufferer, that maybe it was kidney stones he had. I think we all read our own into that. In any case, Saul is baptized into the way. Now, at once we're told he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. This isn't what the synagogue leaders had in mind, so much for getting help from head office. And after many days had gone by, a plot was hatched to do away with the traitor against the temple. Now, famously, Saul escapes Damascus by being lowered in a basket over the city wall, and he makes his way back to Jerusalem. Not surprisingly, the Jerusalem disciples view him with great suspicion. Well, wait a minute. Maybe this is some kind of trick for Saul the persecutor to root out more of us. But a prominent believer named Barnabas spoke on Saul's behalf. We met Barnabas earlier. He's the guy who sold property and gave the money, all the money, to the apostles. His name means son of encouragement, and he took Saul under his wing. Now, once again, death threats are made against Saul for his preaching, and the believers now bundle him back off to his hometown of Tarsus, where Saul cools his heels for an undetermined period of time. When Saul writes of this elsewhere, he indicates a period of somewhere between 3 and 7 years. But Luke sums up these years in a single sentence. Then the church throughout Judea, Galilee, and Samaria enjoyed a time of peace and was strengthened. Living in the fear of the Lord and encouraged by the Holy Spirit, it increased in numbers. Apparently, with Saul no longer active, the time of persecution entered a lull. And so now Luke turns his attentions away from Saul to Peter, who's traveling around the country spreading the good news. Various healings are ascribed to him, including even the return to life of a faithful disciple named, in Aramaic, Tabitha, or in Greek, Dorcas. Again, many of these early folks had names in both languages, like Peter. That was his Greek name. Simon was his Hebrew or Aramaic name. Now, both Tabitha and Dorcas mean gazelle, and she's described as always doing good and helping the poor. Now, there's a neat wordplay as part of this healing. Indulge me for a moment here. Remember the raising by Jesus of the daughter of the synagogue leader Jairus. Peter was an eyewitness of that miracle, and he relates the story to us in Mark chapter 5, where the words are carefully recorded, the exact words that Jesus said, which were spoken in Aramaic, Talitha koum. Mark translates it for us, little girl, get up. Now, Peter is brought to a dead woman named, not Talitha, which means little girl, but Tabitha. What does he say? Tabitha, get up, or in Aramaic, Tabitha koum, not Talitha koum, Tabitha koum. Perhaps Peter thought, hey, it worked for Jesus, and it worked for Peter too, as Tabitha is restored to life. Finally, all those years of studying Aramaic have paid off. Now, as Jesus did with Talitha, Peter takes Tabitha by the hand and helps her to her feet. Not surprisingly, all of Joppa, which is now a suburb of modern Tel Aviv, is abuzz with the news. Taking advantage of this interest, Peter stays there for a period of time at the house of a tanner named Simon, and we'll return there in chapter 10. If you go to Joppa today, you can visit an old building known to this day as the house of Simon the tanner. Perhaps it is at or close to the site of the original home. But closer to home, you can see the stained glass window in Zion dedicated to Tabitha, honoring her work among the needy. Have you noticed it? It's actually Zion's first stained glass window. Come and see it. It's a really nice one, and it's above, more or less above the choir loft above my office door. So, but I'll see you tomorrow in any case, wherever you may happen to be, as we return to Simon the tanner's house in Acts chapter 10. Actually, I'll see you not tomorrow, but I'll see you on Monday for Simon the tanner's house in Acts chapter 10. God bless you, and see you then.